Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Eve. Eve is one of those characters that really requires you to kind of hit yourself early on in order to be able to enjoy her as a character, because she really relies on that risk versus reward of hitting yourself versus getting a transformation, the Whore of Babylon transformation, which increases your damage and speed and just make it so much easier to deal with enemies. So for that reason, what I would usually do is enter the first room that has enemies and use my razor blades to hit myself once, which means I would be at 1 or less hearts remaining, and that room would actually be cleared by my dead bird and by my increased damage. But what happens is, I found out if I do that too early, sometimes the first floor has a few nasty rooms up its sleeve where it has maybe a troll bomb or something like that, and that would deal a full heart of damage to you. And that can really screw you over, because when you're walking on the first floor with only 1 red heart remaining and you don't really have any items or ways to defend yourself other than just your tears, it can really put a damper in a run. You can just die very fast, and that's what happened to me a few times, so I kind of learned to stay away from those weird combinations. So what I do now is just wait with my 2 red hearts until I'm sure that there's a way I can replenish that health, or maybe until I get a spirit heart, and then use it. What's even better in this situation, when I entered the first item room, it had a dead shot item, which is something what I like to call an active damage up. What it does is, whenever you're accurate enough, every shot will subsequently increase your damage, and whenever you miss 2 times, your damage bonus will be reset back to 0. So you really need to keep up the damage up. It's not a passive damage up. You really need to hit your enemies if you want to keep it. And for that reason, I was maybe a bit more comfortable into not going into my Whore of Babylon state immediately, just because it wasn't really important for me to sustain it, because I had other ways of dealing damage. But in this situation, thankfully, we did get a lot of red health, and on this floor we even got Death's Touch, which is, I would argue, one of the best items you can pick up early on. And not because of the damage up, because it gives you penetrator shots. I really feel like the penetrator shots are one of the most useful effects in the game, because early on they help you clearing rooms so much, because your damage is essentially multiplied by how many enemies you can hit, and when there's like 5 or 6 enemies in the room and you're able to deal with all of them at the same time, that's really something spectacular. And the fact that we have the Death's Touch, the Dead Shot, and the other damage item we got, I'm not sure, the Whore of Babylon transformation, we're really set up until the mom fight, or at least until the Womb 1, because this damage combination is just strong enough on its own that we're actually able to deal with enemies so much faster. And the fact that we have penetrator shots, it also means that we would be able to sustain our accuracy much better, because we're hitting more enemies at the same time, and every one of those hits actually counts for our damage increase. So that means if we just fire 1 shot into 5 enemies, we would immediately get that 5 damage up bonus, which is obviously very great. But what I do to kind of ruin everything I've just been talking about is I pick up the Ipecac item, and the Ipecac item, what it does, it transfers your tears into explosive tears that explode on contact. Obviously that sounds very cool, and it is, but what it does, it negates your penetrative shots, because now there's no way for the shots to actually go through your enemy. It also negates our dead shot, because it's much harder to be accurate with this item, and we really can't hit usually more than 2 enemies at once, just because the explosive radius on this isn't as big. There was also a funny glitch, I guess, happening, or maybe an interaction that is a bit unsuspicious, that the shots that were landing were actually much better at hitting me than the enemies, and for some reason it really seemed like the hitbox for enemies was much slower than it was for me, and you'll see that later in the Hush fight, where something very unprecedented happens. It's just so weird with how these items interact, and you can really never tell. Sure, when you think about it, it's a damage up, why wouldn't I take it? And you get these cool sides that you can throw around. It really seemed like a good idea back then, but now I just saw that just via how it affects the way you hit enemies, the hitbox, or the logic behind of killing enemies is not just shooting them anymore. You have to catch them in the blast explosion, and when that blast explosion changes based on which items you have, then things can get a bit unpredictable, like in this situation. Still, what I did is I took Ipecac, because not only does it give you these shots, it also gives you an immense damage up. And on that floor I found Shoop the Whoop, and a Shoop the Whoop with an immense damage up means you can really deal with enemies super fast. So we can enter basically any boss room, and if we're fighting any enemy on any second room because it has a 2-room charge, and we can use the Shoop the Whoop to just kill and obliterate enemies. I'm not even in my Whore of Babylon state here, and you can see that I'm basically one-shotting all bosses here, and that was really what I was going for. And I was really relying on this combo working for boss rush, and I was thinking, you know, okay, Hush is gonna be a problem because obviously he's not gonna die in just one charge of our Shoop the Whoop item, but I can rely on my tears because I do have some AoE to them, and they're dealing quite high damage on their own, and that way, you know, maybe that's another way to deal with Hush, just because he's one single target enemy. Of course, Hush always gets more annoying whenever you're fighting his enemies that he spawns, just because they're usually the annoying ones you can deal with. They're just hard to deal with unless you have AoE, and because he burrows down when he spawns them, and he usually spawns a bunch of them, if your tear shot speed is not high enough, if your damage is not high enough, or if you don't have a way to just kill them, then what happens is he will overwhelm you, and especially if he starts shooting at the same time when he spawns the enemies, then there's just no way you can deal with it. But thankfully the boss rush here is much easier to deal with, because what we do is basically whenever we kill a wave, which happens in half a second if we're lucky, we can use our Shoop the Whoop again and kill the next wave immediately. Sometimes the enemies won't spawn in the line, and that's fine. Like I said, we still have a high damage up, we can still rely on our explosive tears to deal with the enemies that kind of stay away from us, that maybe don't line up just as well. The only thing that's annoying, like in this situation, is fighting the small enemies, because first of all you can't really see them, and like I said, the explosive, you saw just right there that the explosive radius is so much bigger than what it seems to be, and it's like super weird that this happens. But like I said, Isaac is unpredictable sometimes. I do teleport out of the boss rush to actually go explore the last 2 rooms I didn't explore. I would have wished to go to the boss trap room, but I just wasn't able to get myself to 1 red heart, because like I said, I did trade my Razor away in hopes of keeping Shoop the Whoop. Like you probably saw, that it was actually a very worthwhile item, and we were done with boss rush in 2 minutes. What I should have done here, in retrospect, is, like I said, I shouldn't have picked up Ipecac. It was obviously a soul food item, it wasn't really a good pickup. I actually went past it once, and I decided I'm not gonna pick it up because I know this is gonna screw me over, and I'm just gonna hit myself more times than expected. Just because, you know, when you're dealing with explosions, eventually you're gonna hit yourself a few times. But in this situation it was even worse, like I said, because the hitbox got so weird for some reason, and I just managed to get hit myself so many more times than expected, and that really puts me in a very odd situation with health. And I even went into the curse room here for some reason, thinking that I would be able to replenish it, but of course, as you might expect, things don't always work out as planned. Thankfully, because we do have this, at least we have the damage up from the Ipecac, we can use our Shoop the Whoop on these floors, but you can see that I was suspecting that things are about to go awry when we entered the Hush fight, and maybe I should have relied maybe on a different tactic here. Maybe I should have relied on just taking as much red health as possible and maybe trying to survive through that. And you saw that I'm still kind of sticking to my Whore of Babylon state, even in this situation is not very useful, but maybe the reason I was sticking with it is because I did pick up Thunder Tides earlier on, which decreases your speed quite significantly, and I don't really like being slow, so I kind of stay in the Whore of Babylon state to compensate for that. Thankfully, what happens here is we do find the black market. Sadly, however, it doesn't have any good items, but what I do is use it to just trade 2 of my hearts away to get in a situation where I only have 1 red heart remaining, and I was hoping that maybe would be a better way to deal with things, because I would have the increased speed, and I was thinking maybe with increased speed I can use that to actually dodge the bullets a bit more. But of course, you know, like with anything in Isaac, that the plans that you make in your head usually don't work, at least not for me. I always overthink things, I think, and just make things a bit harder for myself. Thankfully, like I was saying, you know, surprisingly, even though we have this amazing giant sight of death that we can use, you just saw how hits are not hitting him for some reason. Some hits are dealing massive amounts of damage, and it really feels like it depends on which angle you hit him at. And some shots weren't hitting them when it looked like they should, and some shots were hitting them, but they were dealing less damage than you might suspect they should. And like I said, I'm not really sure what causes this weird synergy to happen, or I guess anti-synergy, but I knew that I should have picked up Ipecac. Like I said, I even went past it by once and then I returned to pick it up. I was saying, you know, I don't want to be the guy who sees Ipecac and has this crazy combo and doesn't pick it up, because I still think this game is primarily about fun, but when you're in this situation, then things can get awry. I did try to combat it though, because I knew when he starts spawning the enemies, I will have to find a way to deal with it, and I didn't feel like the Ipecac shots will be enough just because of this weird synergy. So what I did is took the death card with me, hoping that that will be good for one enemy spawn, so when he spawns the blue guys, and Shoop the Whoop would be okay for the other one. So that means I have I can kind of clear 2 waves, and I was hoping that he was gonna be a nice boss fight this time, and he wasn't gonna spawn like a million waves, but only maybe 2 or 3 at most. So because I have tools to deal with it, and that's the reason why I took the death card. The flies aren't really a problem, just because they don't really home on you, and I still have a way to deal with them. But when he starts spawning the blue guys and the polyps and the shots at the same time, you really need a quick way to deal with it, so just so you can then normally dodge the shots that he provides. The continuum shots aren't too big of a problem here. I discussed the strategy before. What you do is, when you clear the flies and of course all of that, if there are enemies in the screen, of course it's much harder, but when there are no enemies, I think it's one of the best attacks you can do, because you can reliably not get hit while still being in range to actually hit him. Sadly, what he does here is he does his first wave very fast, and in retrospect maybe I shouldn't have used my Shoop the Whoop here, just because he didn't. Usually he can spawn a lot more than that. For some reason he stopped very prematurely. There were only like 10 of them. I thought that he was gonna spawn more of them, but like in this situation, you know, he spawned like I think 30 of them, and in the before situation he only spawned like 10 of them. And then, you know, he does it again, which is super unfortunate. You can see that the range of my explosions on my Ipecac shots just isn't very high, but the range for them hitting me is super bonkers for some reason. And like I said, I'm hoping that you can see this, and that I'm not just imagining things. And I'm in this situation where they're polyp shooting at me, where they're the blue guy shooting at me. I have to be wary of where I'm standing, because the shots also deal damage to me. And then, just as if finished dealing with one wave, he just spawns another one. And that's the end of me, because there's no way to kind of get away from this. I was thinking he was doing his continuum shots again, so that's why I went to the left, when maybe I should have stuck to the right, which would be a lot safer, at least for the blue guys. But of course I wouldn't be able to see the continuum shots coming in from the right and then dodge them appropriately. So yeah, though just in total, a very good run. I really felt good about this one, kind of ruined by the fact that we took a synergy that was just a bit unprecedented and just a bit unlucky. But for you know, at least we're learning, so we know that when the next time this opportunity comes along, we know that this is not maybe a combination we want to take. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.